Well, I want to talk a little bit about the courthouse model that they contacted me about making. The idea here was to basically do a snapshot of the way the courthouse would have appeared in 1906 and or thereabouts. And I did find, my first thought was, well, it hasn't changed that much, but indeed it actually had a fair amount in some areas. There had been annexes built onto the back, and these have now been removed for the most part. There is an annex in this area now which remains, mainly I think because it's still functional and is working quite well. Again, we want to step back and see how this would have looked about the time it was built. First of all, I tried to track down plans by R.S. Smith, and he had been an architect who came in and assisted with the Biltmore House at a later point in its construction. So he's an English architect who came to the States, and I did find a copy through the Genealogical Society of his plans, and we may get a shot of this later, but they were undersized, and I still don't know where the original ones are, and really can't find anybody who does know where the original ones are, if they still do indeed exist. But fortunately, these older documents were available. Also fortunate in making this all possible was that in 2005, I believe it was, restoration was done on the courthouse, which required them going through and basically drawing up full plans of the whole courthouse. So a lot of my model is based on these drawings, going back and comparing to the old ones to find out which parts to omit or change or alter. Also, for the process, a lot of photos taken around the existing courthouse, and again with knowledge of what has changed as much as I can find out. There was one room, I think of mild interest, that was found to be totally blocked off up in this area. And when they were working on a wall up there, they knocked through and found out this whole room was there, completely unseen and completely unused since goodness knows when. These would be windows at some point. Okay, so another little footnote is one reason I have a personal interest in doing this anyway is my grandfather had been a judge in this very courtroom, and my father practiced law there as a lawyer. So it's a personal project as well. Going back to the old Smith drawings, I found a few changes that differ from the way it appears now. Not anything real major, but the judge's area had different construction, and I thought of interest over here was there was a pen that allowed a prisoner to be held in the court where he could view the proceedings from this space where he couldn't get out. We've been chuckling here around the house about how he was also up against one of the jury boxes, and if that was the jury for his trial, he would do well to be kind and not say anything too rude to them, since they held his fate in their hands. But I've been impressed as I've looked at this, the thoughtful design, and I'm sure it's typical. I'm not sure there's anything unique about this courthouse layout, but it was interesting to note the well thought out plan for the use of the space. This seating up here during the time of Jim Crow would have been used for the African American audience for the proceedings, and so they would have had to sit up in this area, segregated away from the rest of the group. So there's a little bit of history there, although, to say, this was built in 1906, so this is post-Civil War, so we're at least beyond that for a time frame here. On this next level down, this is when you come in the front entrance, which is actually the front is over here. But when you come in the front entrance, there's what one would see as a marble floor, and these are shallow tiles, so the basement would have held this up sufficiently. And One little thing I found is a back room here, which is now a museum space, would allow some committees to meet and some small group meetings. And I'm not really through with that yet. Also, I don't think I have it with me right here, but you'll see it in the final model. I have desks and bookcases and some other things that I'm going to be casting in resin. So rather than making it over and over again, I'm going to be able to replicate some of those items for different rooms. And I have oriental rugs, which is speculation on my part, in a few of the office spaces. Some of the spaces would have been much more public, would have been like for records and all back here, and probably would not have had that. But some of the places that would have been for officials, I have a feeling might have been decked out just a little bit better for the time period. So, of interest, when you come into the front of the courthouse, you'll see some radiators, which I may or may not try to model in here. But at the present, they're not connected to anything. I found that kind of interesting and humorous that they're there just for looks at this point. But they do give a sense of the place. Another thing that I found out in the process was that there had been a trough in one of the basement rooms. My assumption is that this trough had been brought in from outside, that had been used for horses for a while. But much to my surprise, when I got there, I found that the trough was actually built into the wall against this outside window. And when I went, even though Mr. Smith's plans show a window in the other position, it had been a door. And I asked somebody about my speculation about this, and they tended to agree considering the time span. Some cars were on the road, as is represented by this, but most of the transportation and most of the deliveries and things of that nature would have been by horse at the time. So it is very likely that some of the people working here in the courthouse would have had their horses either held outside or could be brought into that lower room during the colder weather. So you had a way to keep your horse out of the inclement weather if it got really bad. I've not been able to find out anything about any other structures that might have been outside, and still looking for any records of that. So,
did you have did you want to mention the gallows, or was that an off-camera?
The gallows is interesting. I'm kind of tempted to mention the other, to be honest. Like fools go where.
Yeah. I mean, just go ahead. I'll edit it right to you referring to the
sure.
adjacent.
Well, I'll go back to showing this, because there's another little interesting footnote with that too. Let's get these in place, in the proper places. One interesting thing I found out in the process of doing this was that where this back view is, it's very difficult to find photos. Everybody was taking wonderful pictures of the front of the courthouse. Very few people were taking pictures of the back. Fortunately, we found some old images that the Genealogical Society has just recently gotten a hold of. They were taken from Tom's Hill, and there's also some Baker and Barber images that are similar that do show the back of the courthouse, and gives us a sense of what was in some of these areas. One thing that's of interest is this, which would have been the upper part of the windows, is actually painted in white. And one speculation on my part is that the afternoon sun coming in might have been an issue for the people in the courtroom having a lot of glare. So by painting those white, that would allow them a little bit better sight in the courtroom. And yet, the very fact that these windows were here were to allow light in, so they had to kind of balance their needs. But another thing that had happened was these windows were fully bricked up at a later point. And the story I hear from that is that the jail at that particular point in time was right here, across this small alley. And it's also about as high as the courtroom. One of the problems they had, and this is a timeless problem I guess, is that some of the prisoners were exposing themselves to the court proceedings. So I think they found that to be enough of a problem to simply brick up those windows and do away with having that problem at all. It's also of interest that that the jail, being here, was within sight of where the present Curb Market property is, I believe. It's either the Curb Market or the next one down. That there were gallows down there at some point, so those who were in the jail could, or at least some of them, could observe the actual hangings as sentences were carried out, which would be a good incentive to stay out of trouble. That's that. Think of what else here.
That's wonderful.
I did want us to talk about this briefly.
Pull back here. All right.
A lot of the parts for this have had me walking all around town trying to find...
Can you start once again? My
sure.
fluid head just slipped.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
Working on some of the parts for this, I've had to go around town trying to find raw materials. And no one's ever going to get online and find a model of a column like this. And this is not nearly finished either. But the front columns have a taper. And the reason for that taper, and this is often goes back to the Greeks and Romans. Sometimes they were straight up, but often they were tapered so that the observer looking up would have this appearance of the column being much taller. So it's there to fool the eye and give the sense that the column is a lot taller than it actually is. And so that came into the design of the columns. And that caused an issue for me in that I simply couldn't use a wooden dowel or plastic rod for this. It's going to be straight up and down. And I thought, what am I going to do? But fortunately, I happened to notice that Sharpie markers had a taper and were very, very close to what I needed. So by cutting it in the right spots, that worked. There are also on the dome some very small columns doing the very same trick. So I was able to find some little cheap plastic paint brushes that, again, had a taper and was able to cut them up to make use of it. And I thought this was going to just drive me mad doing these column tops, and they may yet. I'm not done. But the complexity, once you break it down and start taking little bits as opposed to trying to hit the whole thing at once, the complexity is not too bad. So another little item that I think is of interest, and I'm not really sure how I'm going to handle it yet, there was a fountain out front. The ring from that fountain is still on the property and has been moved over to this corner and sits around a flagpole. So you can go over and look at it even today. But that ring had in the middle, as I say, a small water fountain. It was not quite the style of everything else. I have a feeling it was added after the initial building. And in fact, we do have a time span of a few years. And then I'm hesitant to call this bad taste, but someone had decided at some point to put a cherub in the middle of the fountain, and that cherub was there for many years. So if you go to, there's a large photo in the elevator lobby at the courthouse that has a picture of the fountain without the cherub. If you look over against the building, you can see where someone has removed it, probably that day or within a few days, and moved it over to the building to be out of sight when they took the pictures. But it isn't out of sight, it's very much in plain view. So you will find the cherub leaning up against the building on what I'm assuming was its last day on the property.